I have one more book review for you this evening. It is actually a book that I really enjoyed, so I'll enjoy this review much more than I did the one of The Simple Truth. It's actually been sitting on my shelves for several years now because I wanted to read something else before I had a chance to get to it, and you could probably tell from the title of the video what both the book is and what I wanted to read before. The book that I'll be reviewing in this video is this one. It is John Gardner's Grendel. And of course, the book that I wanted to wait and the book that I wanted to read first before I read Grendel was Beowulf. So this is the edition of Beowulf that I got. It's the Norton Critical edition, which happens to be a prose translation, as you can see. I'll also be reviewing this one shortly, since everyone who watches this channel knows that I review every single book that I read. I'm just trying to really find something interesting to say about Beowulf. I may just end up talking about the critical articles at the end of it, because everyone and their mother knows what Beowulf is about, so I'm not really going to just give you a summary of it. But this one was actually a pretty serviceable translation, and the critical material was pretty good too. So this is Grendel, and obviously what I wanted to do was read Beowulf just to have some understanding of the basic narrative arc that goes on beyond Grendel attacking, the mead hall, which is what everyone knows from the story. So I brought both of these to Baltimore with me and read Beowulf mostly on the plane to Baltimore, and then Grendel soon after we got here. So just tell you a little bit about the book. Grendel is, of course, John Gardner's wonderful retelling of the great Anglo-Saxon, or if you prefer to call it Old English, poem, Beowulf, which was written sometime between 675 and 1025. So you have this huge span of 350 years where it could have been written any time in there. It also happens to be one of the first really successful parallel novels. A parallel novel is a literary form that sort of reimagines or reconfigures the action of a story that the audience is already presumably familiar with. It's one of the most successful ones that I've ever read. So another example would be Gregory Maguire's Wicked, which retells the action of The Wizard of Oz through the eyes of the witches. And it's usually through the eyes of the anti-hero or the ogre, the person you're rooting against, right? Just like you're rooting against Grendel. At least when you read Beowulf. When you read Grendel, you end up rooting for him. Gardner was actually a medievalist by training, but I wouldn't be too surprised from reading the book if he actually knew Anglo-Saxon too. The book makes it clear that he's lived with Beowulf, not just the character, but the poem, and that he's also lived with Grendel, too. He's sort of gotten inside of Grendel's mind, which really results in this richer, fuller reimagining of Grendel's sense of deep curiosity about the world, which we find that Gardner actually gives him, and his also equally deep existential sense of despair at his own position in the world. This could have been just a straight, simple, forward narrative account of the action of Beowulf through Grendel's eyes. But Gardner really imbues Grendel with all the philosophical wonder and the bewilderment of a human being, which makes him all the more poignant of a figure. When Grendel sees the Shaper, and the Shaper is actually, takes a little bit of explanation, the Shaper is a very literal translation of the Anglo-Saxon word Skulp, which is actually the bard who sings in King Hrothgar's mead hall. So he's the one sort of, you can imagine him just sort of playing on whatever equivalent of a lyre he might have or something, and just sort of weaving out these tales, these myths of the heroic Danes. When Grendel sees the Shaper singing these songs of heroic victory, he becomes incensed at how the Danes can contort reality for their own purposes in their songs. And he asks himself, why do they lie to themselves like this? Why do they lie to themselves? And later on, he finds an answer to his own question. He happens to run into this dragon, because dragons just happen to be living around the marshy fen. And the dragon has this keen grasp of medieval scholastic philosophy, as all dragons should. And he explains to him the job of the Shaper. And the dragon tells Grendel, the Shaper, Grendel, is what convinces humanity that reality is really real, that their reality is the reality. And out of this conversation about the Shaper, about the Skulp, with the dragon, you get this richly textured dialogue about just beautiful revelations about the art of mythopoesis, the nature of storytelling itself, art itself, what the aim of art and storytelling are. And he tells him this, and at the very end, the dragon tells him that I, the dragon, can see both past, present, and future, where you, Grendel, are just like humans. You can just see the present and the past. So the dragon has this fatalistic view of reality, which characteristically makes Grendel pissed. And he storms off, angered, confused, enraged, in denial, which is most of the mental states which occupy Grendel's time. Since raw, brute power plays a not insignificant role in the Anglo-Saxon world in which this poem was written and that the novel is about, it's really no surprise that there's a discussion also of political philosophy, in which the Hobbesian view of reality eventually wins out. Everything is about power and exerting power. Grendel defends his relentless attacks on the mead hall by saying that he is the force in the Danes' lives which gives them meaning, and therefore it's only his continued carnage against the Thanes of Hrothgar's hall that continues to let the Shaper sing the stories that he sings, and therefore allows them to remain human. So there's this wonderful tension that John Gardner sets up, that while you're reading Beowulf, you see Grendel as this wholly monstrous, this huge monstrosity, lacking reason, lacking anything other than just a sheer rage and violence against the Danish Thanes. And then you have his retelling, which sort of creates this dynamic tension. It sort of reconfigures what it means to be human by comparing it to monstrosity itself. So you sort of get this Duradian deconstructionist view of what it means to be a human being by comparing it to its opposite. And you find out that you can only have that binary opposition there, or those two poles can only arise out of a binary opposition, which he really does really well. And regardless of what you think of Grendel's rationalization of his own violence, you have to admit that his explanation, which is really, I guess, the dragon's explanation, because the dragon tells him this: you, Grendel, you are what make humans human. You are the reason why the Shaper sings these songs, and you are what drives the Thanes forward. You are the force that gives them meaning. I mean, that argument has a sheer logical power all of its own. And to think that those in the meat hall only feared his strength and his size when they should have feared his power of reason makes Grendel an even more formidable foe. Later, there's another conversation, which I won't really go into here, on the nature of religion with a priest, which again really pisses off Grendel and sends him, into a state of more existential dread. And sort of behind all of these characters rests the figure of Grendel's mother, who is a minor figure in the novel, but she's totally compelling. She holds down, the marshy fen as only a protective mother figure could, and her inability to speak really frustrates Grendel, reminding him of his distance from humanity and his distance from storytelling and everything the Shaper does. But then again, he's also in this position to critically think about where he is. So again, you get this tension between monstrosity and humanity, and there's this unbridgeable gap between the two that Grendel occupies. Like I said, I waited until I read Beowulf to read this. I hate to admit it, but I had never read Beowulf. And while Grendel would be enjoyable for absolutely anyone, it will be more wonderful still for someone who has invested themselves in a careful reading of the original poem. It provides, like I said, the narrative framework which allows the reader to focus less on the action of the novel, which really is not the most important part of Gardner's overall vision, but instead allows you to focus on the tender, wonderful, passionate humanization of Grendel himself, which is remarkable to behold, I have to say. Grendel by John Gardner.